Well, I think we are ready to get started again. My name is Benjamin Ibarra Sevilla. I am introducing myself lately as one of the brand spanking new faculty members here to join the Latin American initiative of the School of Architecture here at UT Austin. So very happy to be here and very happy to have this opportunity to introduce to you our next speaker, Federico Mirabal Pietra. Federico Mirabal Pietra is an architect by the Universidad de la República in Uruguay and holds a master's degree by the Politecnico de Milano in Italy. He actually teaches in both of universities. Federico has received several first prizes in architectural competitions. Among these prizes stands out the first prize in the competition for the new urban project at Bardolino, Lago di Garda in Italy, and the recent nomination for the prize International Young Designer of the Year of India. He was a finalist in the Bienals of Santiago de Chile, 2002, Lima, Peru, 2004, Montevideo, Uruguay, 2006, and Quito, Pan American Bienal in 2006 as well. He was nominated in the top 10 young architects for the 6th Ibero-American Bienal of Architecture and Urbanism, which was celebrated in Lisbon, Portugal in 2008, and was selected as a finalist to represent Uruguay in the Latin American Architectural Bienal of Pamplona in Spain in 2013. Federico has been part of several publications and exhibitions in Chile, Italy, Argentina, Peru, Uruguay, Spain, Switzerland, Portugal, Indonesia, India, and Mexico. In 2011, he participated in the International Furniture Fair of Milan in Italy, and in 2012, in the International Design Fair in Shanghai, China, and International Architecture Exhibition of Venice as a representative of Uruguay, along with 5 other architectural firms. Federico currently directs the firm OAP Architects, which is located in Punta del Este, and he has designed a variety of buildings, all of them developed with the exquisite rigor and refinement necessary to create outstanding pieces of architecture. I actually had the opportunity to sit briefly and had a brief conversation with Federico about this introduction because I had the pleasure to meet him few hours ago. And he said, yes, all that introduction, all that formality and official recognition is okay. But what I really love is architecture. Please help me welcome Federico.
Well, thank you very much. Especially thanks to Barbara, Wilfred, and Kevin, also to Irina, that we share a very nice moment in Uruguay last month when we visit some of Eladio Dieste work together. I want to say also that my English is not so, it's a little rusty, not so good, but I think the visual presentation is, our language is more not necessary so to talk just to see drawings and photographs. I really want to say that we perceive a very nice atmosphere here in Austin, very young and fresh and not contracturate atmosphere. That is, we feel very comfortable here as Latin Americans people. And what I want to speak now, I will show you quickly a lot of projects, but to explain the same concept that perhaps we discovered this in some, perhaps this concept became consciously after a lot of analyzing, after a lot of work and making a lot of mistakes. I think we discovered some elements that emerge like essential elements for architecture. These are such a little provocation also for the students, just to transfer to the students some this little concept that we think very important. All this work, obviously, there are not only each building I will show you is doing with other colleagues, friends, Marcelo Benaric, Ulises Torrado, Martin Covas, in different projects, Metro Architecture from Brazil, I will explain, but obviously architecture is depends on the quality of this relationship, this collaboration, human collaboration. It's not, I think, a personal creation only. Well, to start, well, I come from the south of the south. Montevideo, the capital of Uruguay, is the southest capital of America. So we have also a winter, very cold, and we don't have the lucky of David to make this nice structure. We need some isolation also to survive. Well, this is an abstract analysis of some footprint of some project. We are going to see 9 of these projects. This is an artist representation of Alejandro Durell, one friend artist, who make this for us. And to focus on some topics that there are not dogmatic topics, just to provocate perhaps a discussion after the speech, just to reflect of the philosophy of architecture. Well, I think to recognize the essential elements, it's necessary to work with the tool of abstraction. Only with abstraction we can arrive to the essential concepts or essential elements. I not said this, I not invent this. Aristotle said this 3,000 years ago, and I just repeat some little concept that can be applied in architecture. So, after analyzing this project, I will show you. I can say that in every project there is a common thing, that common value, that architecture is composed essentially by the position of the volumes. This affirmation I would like to show you in the project. This concept of the position of the volume that essentially compose the architecture is that we can call on the concept of Beaux-Arts the idea of the el partido. To recognize this in every project, we need to work with abstraction. So this is our abstraction of the project I want to show you. Now we are going to see this project. It's a house. So this drawing is a little disordered because we did it quickly last day. So we start to analyze some project we did, and we arrived to the conclusion these are some houses in the same scale and in the same orientation. And we discovered that we always do the same projects. So this common, but with this, with some repeat concept. Are different all, but they are basically organized by 7 or 8 topics. Obvious for you, there are no news, perhaps more interested for the students. This is a house. This was a contest we win when we were students 10 years ago. This house is a competition students, and who win the competition build the house. This is a traditional lottery we organize, and then with this money we travel 1 year all around the world. So it's a very nice history of our school. This trip around the world we did with a lottery, and one of the prime of this lottery is this house that is the result of a contest. So this is the section. This is the footprint of the volumes, principal volumes. Here is a street, and here is another street. Here. So we have to organize 2 houses. There are 2 houses. This is a symmetrical axis. One house is here, and one house is here. This is a section here. And north is in this direction. So our north is your south. Our north is the sun. So the sun, the wind, the water, the views, the human being, geometry, composition, rhythm, inspiration, poetical, metaphoric, the thickness, the importance of the concept of thickness, all these topics are in all these projects. So, to be clear, this is the plan of the 2 houses. How to organize 2 houses in this land? Instead of divide the land with a wall, we divide the land with a volume. So this is the cluster of this house, and this is the cluster of this house. The same concept in the interior of this house. This volume organizes this space. And this concept of the architectural composition and the composition of the volume, and this concept of the thickness, I think is very important. Obviously, the work of Peter Sumter or Aires Mateus or Soto de Moura, I think our big reference in that sense. Also, the concept of the sun, the water, on this basic element that condition the position of the volumes. You can read some about Glenn Murcutt also about this concept. So this ecological concept. And this is north. The sun comes from this side. So the cluster should be in this position, not in the inverse position. The wind comes from this side. For that, the section protects for the winds, the cluster. So this determines what we call the el partido. And the difference to consider the limits in architectural landscape or biological limits not are aligned, never are aligned. Such our administrative or political limits are absurd, because the limits are all the limits have a density and always are a thickness, also in a small scale. That is what we want to express in this project. So there are not plan walls. There are concept of the volume as organized spaces. This is this house we visit also with Barbara. It's a little reformer. Also the contrast, the value of the contrast is heavy. This light. We are going to see the power of the contrast in many projects also. This is a 30 meters cement, I don't know how to say in English, without beams, slab. This is the view from the other street. This is the volume, the center of the house. This is the way we work with this stone, volcano stone. I think I have to go more quickly because there are so many images. This is interior of the stone volumes. This is a house for an artist in Montevideo, Uruguay. That basically is volume who define one space, another space in the north, in the south. Here is the chiostro. Here is the atelier of this artist, and this is the bedroom. Also, in the plant view, this is the kitchen to organize this space. This organized this space, and this volume organized all the project. This is the atelier. It's a little. This is the main entrance, the atelier, and the kiosk. Also, an important concept that we can show in every project in our latitudes. This house was built with $300 square meters. It's like we have to use materials that not require maintenance because there is not a maintenance culture also in our countries, in our latitudes. So it's like Brazil, I think, or Argentina. So we try to use material in natural state to not need some maintenance in the future. So steel, cement, or in the last project, in the other project, cement and stone. This is okay. Here you can see the volume and the volume to basically organize the house. This is a small house for a journalist in a places we don't have electricity, we don't have water. It's like an island condition in the coast of Uruguay near Brazil. This is the north here, so we make this gallery as the last project to the north. This is the rooms this is the ground floor, and this is the second floor. This is the topological interpretation of this concept of the volumes. It's like a hall here. So this house cost $12,000. We did it 8 years ago. Now perhaps it will cost 20, but not more than less. It's very cheap. It's very quickly. We pre-arm in a cover space, and then we travel to arm in the place. You can see in the web perhaps a video to show this. It's a very nice beach near the coast of Brazil, but there are not private property here. It's like a hippie place. So also here the concept of the contrast. This is the gallery. No cars. It's like a Venice of Uruguay. So it's a very interesting place. And this is the house. Inspired also some Antonio Bonet houses. The concept of the house is like a photography camera. So from inside, the the landscape is captured like a photo camera. So this is from inside. The sunset, the lighthouse, and the difference is from the gallery. Okay, this is a house we did for near Jose Ignacio. This is a very nice place near Punta del Este, in the Brazil direction. The concept here was in this project support on this land pillar and this water pillar. So also the basic elements, the fire, the water, the land, the air, are in these projects. Here we have a lake, and we have the north in this direction. So very important, because in Uruguay the wind, the south wind, condition the use of the spaces. It's for that this basic thing, common sense, the sun, wind, water, views, the human being, the proportion, some inspiration, and the concept of the thickness, all determinate what we can call the parti, el partido. So the plan is this thickness have all the service, fire, bathrooms, kitchen. This is our parrilla, where we have the barbecue. It's obligatory in every house to have the barbecue. And obviously there is some proportions study, geometry proportions. Read that architecture needs to be architecture. This is the structure is 9 meters without pillars. And this is from the roof. This is from the swimming pool. And this is from the corridor. The nice thing is this house is like a boat, because the lake go up, and when the lake go up, the water becomes behind the house. So the sensation is very nice. It's very nice too. There are not buildings in the landscape, so the landscape is like a piece of art, really. This is from inside. This is the interior chiostro. The photographs are not professional. There are these photos we take it with some friends, or we don't have money to pay a photography. This is a poetical interpretation. This is near Brazil, a house also we show you last year. And this is basically the organization of the house. So you can distinguish the organization of the volumes, and this we call the parti. This is all the information we need to understand the project. This is in a fish village near Brazil, very nice. These are volumes of stones, kitchen, the parrilla, bathroom, and other bathroom, and this is the, I don't know how to say in English, the placar. It sounds good, yes. Close it. ¿Se escucha bien? Sí. Okay. These are some sketch sections. This is the last section. This is one of the volume, the other volume, and the different levels. And the roof and the wall is the same. It's like the metaphor is like an animal we call armadillo.
So this is a structure without, it's like a portic structure without tension cables, without cables. This is from the interior. So this is the last house, and then we start another project. Here we explore here we explore the power of this idea of the volumes, and the land was here was the sea, but there are a nice view in this direction. So there are two tensions, one tension in one direction and one tension. So we decided to organize the houses in a diagonal direction to contemplate these two strong tensions of the place. These are the two houses. The north is here, so the parrilla is in this side. Also the extension exterior space in this side. But this is to keep the privacy to this space and to this space. So small movements to keep privacy to the two exterior spaces of the house. But the interesting thing there here is that every is in these volumes. Also the beds, the sofas, everything. So the space is theoretically vacío, empty. So what is our ideal spaces that don't need anything? These are the construction process. All the furniture, all is included in these walls. These are some. This is the view to the village I told you before. This is from interior. You can see in the photo sun the bed here, the sofa there. Okay, I go quickly because if I stop in one building, I prefer to show a lot of buildings, but to speak about one concept. This is the idea. This is a building, some real estate building that we really don't like it so much. I would prefer the small houses than this monster building that we did for Argentinian developer in Punta del Este. Basically, the north is here. So all the star spaces are in this direction. This is the bedroom, and this is the service organization. This is some sketch of the building. I will show you quickly. The idea of volume, massive volume, and a very light volume who articulates also the party in the land. This is a plan, so you can see the idea of this strong volume, the service area, and the different apartments. It's a typical apartment building that every apartment are similar. The nice is to have an angle view, very open from here to here. So this is a very nice from perspective. This is the last floor. I have a swimming pool, very nice, in the 14th floor. This is from the ground floor. This is the lobby. This is some render, typical commercial render of. Obviously, this is. These are the angle apartment. And then you can see the skyline of Punta del Este. This is the end of with some study models. Now the building is under construction. Okay, this is a competition we win with Michele or Carolina, other friends, architects in Verona, in Italy. This was communal camping when we had tents and caravans. I don't know, had camping. No? So this concept, yeah, we can apply in every latitude, in everything. Also to make the table in our house. So this topological concept of the volumes. So this is the place in the Garda Lake in Italy. The camping now is close to the waterfront with this nice barrier. This is the camping, and there is a very waterfront promenade, very nice here, and very nice here, but here is cut by this camping campsite. So this is some analysis of the place, also the history or cultural of the place. This is what we need to work, and we make a topographic relevation of the land. This is the piece of the land of the contest. This is the wind of the Garda Lake also. So what we call the partio, the idea that you need some abstraction level to have an idea, is there is here a rock, a very this topographically the place, we can do a lecture of the place, a topographical lecture. This is the peninsula, the rock, and there is this topographically reality. So the project takes this tension, geographic tension, organize all the project with this logic. So the important thing that always the administrative limit of a project is not, we have not to restrict our lecture in an administrative or political view. So we try to understand the logic of the place in a more high scale. Questa topografia, this topography, organize all the projects. So we start to think about like a theater. So to view the lakes, the sun, the winds, and we conclude that we need to connect also this promenade. So this topography, that is the existing topography with the little movement, organizes the different parts, the caravan, the tents, but everyone view the lakes. So instead, the same concept, instead of divide with a line or with a wall, we divide with the topography. So the volumes articulate the space. It's the same concept. It's the same concept. It's powerful to see that the thickness and this movement of the land articulate the spaces. Basta. You don't need a limit. You don't need a wall. This is magnificent of our discipline. So these different levels organize all the projects. This is the footprint that we do. This idea is independent of the budget, because when an idea is so strong and you can recognize it by abstraction, it's not important the budget if you do in different stage. That is what I want to discuss perhaps when the end in the last project. This is some sketches about this concept of organizing the caravan, the tent in different levels to connect the operation to connect the lake. And this is the final results. So this is a public promenade, and this is a tent level, and this is a caravan level. Everyone, like in the house, in the lake, see like a theater the lake. This is some perspective. Obviously, as we talked yesterday with the students in Barbara workshop with Wilfred, if you have an idea, you must be consequent with the idea in the resolution of all the details of the project. So there is a grammatically language in the form, in architecture, that we have to recognize. That if we have to make buildings in this idea, obviously the building should be down this topography. It's not good to have a volume here. It's contradiction with the idea. So the solution of the buildings that are the bathroom, a bar here, the reception, and the bathroom should be behind this topography. It's elementary, but it's just to. So are the three buildings. These three buildings, 1, 2, 3, are under this topography. This is the section. So this is one building, this is the other building, and this is our sport facilities also. Obviously, this is a natural topography. We don't have to do so many movements. This is some of the latest. Okay. To end, this is a very important contest a few months ago. One of the most important contests we had in Uruguay in the latest year. We did with my friend Gustavo Cedroni and Martin Corullón from Studio Metro de Brazil. Brazil have a lot of experience in stadium because they are building a lot of stadium. And we did this project together. Martina and Gustavo, one Metro Studio is one of the studios who collaborates with Paulo Mendes Arrocha. And it was a very nice experience. We met Gustavo last year also in Pamplona. And we did this project together. This was a competition to do it an arena building that is a stadium, covered stadium. The typology of the arena is evolutionate from the polydeportive buildings, but also allows spectacles. So it's not a stadium, open stadium, it's an arena, this concept of the arena. The place is it's called cylinder. Every people in Montevideo recognize the place as the cilindro. This is a Viera structure. Viera was an engineer who works with Eladio Dieste and do magnificent works. And was a very vanguardist engineer. And do these 90 meters diameter with a thickness like this in cement. It costs, if we transfer the cost now, it costs $70,000 that Viera do this roof. The roof in a fire go down. So the municipality called for a contest to make an arena, and the land is in all this land here. So the place is in a very central point of the Montevideo city urban shadow, is here. So this centrality, also the cylindro centrality, and we make this proposal that is a composition of two circles descentrados. En inglés ya está. Two circles descentrados. Okay. Off central. Why off central circles? Because here is the north. Also, the contrast between the heavy and the weight, the wind, the sun, always the same concept. And we discovered that this composition is, and I will talk it now. So the competition asked for a big square, and we decided to do the square under a roof. That is a very nice spaces for Uruguay that we don't have, like Galleria Vittorio Emanuele in Milano, Paxton Pavilion. So these atrium scale spaces. So we decided to maintain this cylinder structure. This is 30 meters. So these are two-stage competition. 90 projects from all parts of the region arrives, and only 5 qualified to the second phase. So we were one of these 5. Obviously, here is a poetic composition about this strong association, and we discover that this composition, obviously, reference of this atrium, Latin atrium, like Paxton, or this landmark, we pretend to be a landmark of Montevideo, the circle, the white circle, like a strong landmark. And these are reference, compositive reference, is Arne Jacobsen, who make this. This is Pepsi Cola logo. Also, Macintosh work a lot with this area composition. This is Kandinsky, this is Joseph Albers. So this not central composition is in the planets, is in many things. Also in the in this, also in this, also in a cellular. So the idea is to always in the project 1 in architecture 1 plus 2 plus 3 is nice. What becomes always 1. So this exterior space plus this interior space 1. This roof and this skin 1. So not a roof and a skin, not a interior area and exterior area, not a space 1 and space 2. Always is 1. This is one of the strong things of the concept. So well, these are the 5 projects to selection to the second stage. The other 4 are square. We are the only circle arena. That we understand that to resolve a circle arena is more difficult than a square arena because of the typology. The arena are very specific programs because you have to respect FIFA requirements, security requirements, and fire requirements, and all requirements. So there are consultants in the world that have parametric programs to organize the stadium and all these type of buildings. So architects, we can do in a executive process, we can do so much moving, because if you move one thing, you disarticulate all the other things. So it's very interesting. The experience was very, very nice. So the other projects were these. We have to compete with these 4 projects. The people from Montevideo, everyone want our project. They telephone us. Every people want the circle project because it's one of the identity of Montevideo. So we have to decide to go ahead with the project. And this is a new footprint because we have to conclude that it's impossible to resolve 10,000 capacity in this existing structure. So one of the decisions is to demolition the old structure. So it was a strong decision. And we were inspired in the Parthenon, that the Parthenon originally was in another place and smaller. And so they, okay, well, but the idea must to be continue. So it was a very difficult decision. And we developed this idea. These are model of the study, or use all the sun explication or calculation of all the things. And this footprint of the section is all. The structure must without pillars here. This is 200 meters. So Paulo Mendes, for Paulo Mendes or for Brazilian people, 200 meters is nothing. For us, it's a lot. This is 30 meters. Also, this is the tower. We have the communication of this. These are some urban studies. This is the structure. It's very interesting, it's like a flower, without pillars here. Here is the pillars of the structure are all in this volume that is masses, and this is light. So this contrast also in this project. The structure was calculated by Rui Furtado, who is an engineer who works with so great architects, and it was a really nice experience to work with him. He usually work with Souto de Moura and Coljas and Paulo Mendes, and when we discovered him because he's working in Brazil, and was very nice experience to work with him. We cannot pay an engineer like this. So this is the section of the building. The arena has to allow all the sports and also spectacles. So this is retractile. This is the VIP zone from here. And this is the more cheap zone. Like, okay, these are some of the renders perspective. Also here the idea of the volumes, not plans. So some final renders. The idea that this you can use when the spectacle is in inside. Also, it could be here another thing, or it could be the same another recital here, and also to use this. So you can have 3 events at the same time, or a big event at the same time. This is the idea of the project. This is the concept of the thickness organization. About this is all the installation structure. All is here. These are the different levels of different configuration here. The skin has different aperture, depends on the orientation, and this is all the visibility calculated that we have to calculate. So it was very interesting to work with this. Okay, just to finish. Okay. So we believe that the space are defined by, and generated essentially by the position of the volume, the tension between them, this phenomenon that manifest from the planets, atoms, quarks, and everything that has mass. This gravitational interaction, attraction, magnetism, electricities, volatilities, geometric, topological, and all these relationships appeal to us and help to compose. So everyone has a body. This is a moral necessary requirement. So what we can explain like a party, the party is that, for example, I want to read this to finish. That I tried to explain yesterday, but in English for me it's a little difficult. For example, for students, what a party is it? If we draw a parallel with a meal, the program is a dinner for 7 people. With an average budget, it is to propose an idea. So you are the chef of this meal, you have to propose an idea. You can make a meal of the season, an exotic meal, a low-calorie meal, one based on May-color meal. All dishes have red vegetables, where all meal people are active, barbecue, fondue, but a party is more than that. It's not an idea. Idea is, for example, to provide a meal based on 3 elements, including seafood dish, a dish of flat land, and air. This is a strong advantage. Whether you have a large budget, it will be produced lobster started, and then the board. And if you have a very small budget, this will give sardines, pork, and quejon. The idea remains strong whatever the budget. This is a party. I don't know if it's clear to explain, but a party needs certain levels of abstraction. It is more than a functional and anecdote. When you have a party, is more, it will resist stress, arrangement, resistance, budget, decrease in initial ambition. So I think, for example, David, when he started the project of the school, I think she have a party, and when you have a party, it's not important the budget. You are not depressed if the budget is low or is high, but the party continue, the idea continue, because the idea needs this abstraction to motivate to continue. Obviously, in our country, we have to auto-stimulate because the money always is so poco. If you want, I have 8 minutes video to finish, but I think perhaps it's too okay. Can you put it just to finish? Oh, this is for the. Let's see the image. This is a Bienal Pavilion Uruguay hub in the Venice Bienal. That this is Sverfen Pavilion. I think Germany Pavilion is here. This is Australian Pavilion, and this is Uruguay Pavilion. Let's continue. So we were invited to propose a new pavilion with other 5 offices. Sorry, the arena we came second place. So we are the press. Finally, politically, I don't know, squares win. So, okay, continue. This is the idea, also the volume, a volume to organize the pavilion. There is an exterior area for the big sculptures. Continue. Also, it's a summer pavilion in Venice. Continue. And this is the idea of the pavilion. Similar also the house. Or, continue. This is the model, was exhibited in the last Venice Bienal. Right? And this is the idea of this space, this organization. Very simple on this different configuration. Continue. This is the section. Okay, and to finish this small video is Marcelo Danza, one professor of the School of Architecture Montevideo, who has invited to talk about this pavilion and the condition of Uruguay conditions. So just to think together, to share and to reflect about this, and after to discuss. 8 minutes and we finish.
The Southern Cross in the smallest corner of the Giardini. If a common territory does exist, no doubt it would be the sky. It embraces space and time. Its cartographies are a mirror for humanity's myths, fears, and ambitions. The sky tells us of the infinite space and of the insignificance of our existence. Its mere contemplation bears our vulnerability, makes us more human, and subjugates us to a whole, to a common space and time. That is why the sky can be described as common ground. The atmosphere is the intelligent device that separates us from the cosmic freeze, and the infinite heat equalizes the extreme, makes our space hospitable, allows for everything beautiful that we can smell, touch, see, and feel. The atmosphere is breeze and is rain, is dense and diaphanous. It is the trigger, the ever-changing device of our common garden's architecture. At this other scale, this scale of the ages, architecture is different to how we architects perceive it. It is not the center of anything, nor of anyone. Architecture is an ephemeral and earthly pleasure, like wine, sensuality, or food. On this map, architecture is merely a new geologic conformation, a set of cavities colonized, inhabited, occupied by a society that, with its myths, histories, affections, and mysteries, rebuilds it constantly. On this other record, the life of cities intertwines with the life of societies. They celebrate and enjoy each other in freedom. There is neither control nor disciplinary action. There are neither styles nor ideologies. There are no correct ways of use. No abhorrent nor immoral pleasures, just cavities, nooks, refuges, corners. On this other map, every passable void is common ground. The atmosphere, its binding fluid, and the sky, an intangible presence. The sky completes the landscape, today's and prehistory's. The sky is the canvas. The northern sky is not the same as the southern sky. The southern sky draws its cross. It is its cross that guides the explorers of this side of the world. In our Western culture, the cross brashly symbolizes burden and liberation, is at once submission and subversion, represents death and resurrection. This gleeful insolence is our South, and that is how it is drawn upon its sky. The pavilion of the people, most to the south of all those who inhabit the Giardini, couldn't be alien to this. Its body, its interior, its skin are not recognized within the fine architecture of architects, but in the dense cavities of the inhabitants. Perhaps this is why the Uruguayan pavilion, the smallest in the Giardini, is crouched among the trees, hiding in the forest, and getting to it is only possible if the wish to do so exists. Perhaps this is why it has only one hole through which to penetrate its shadowy and hospitable womb. Fresh shelter for the visitor on the long summer days in which the art and architecture biennials take place. Its condition, marginal to the streams of the Giardini, also has allowed it to be generous host to the Roma and to the homeless during the long Venetian winter, that time in which it transforms into an empty theatre and recovers its primitive condition. Nowadays, there are projects to change it. There are attempts to draw it closer into the world of the architects. Its simplicity, its insignificance, its indifferent austerity are unbearable for the haughty pride of the architects, who have not yet been able to see it as something just as valuable as a finished work, a communicational infrastructure. Should the smallest pavilion of the southernmost country of all those that inhabit the Giardini shelter in its womb the dreams of the convoked architects to show their skills, fantasizing with how it should be and is not. Is this perhaps another metaphor of contemporary architecture? Does this perhaps speak to us of their preoccupations, their yearnings, of the scale of their maps? However, the austere infrastructure of the pavilion will remain there, indifferent, generous to whoever values it. In the summer, it will provide shelter for the explorers of art and architecture, and will offer housing in the winter for those marginalized by the system. The curious presence of the Uruguayan pavilion in the Giardini challenges us. Where is the sense that a small South American country of little more than 3 million inhabitants, as Uruguay, has a permanent pavilion in the Giardini to dialogue with the world's great cultural generators? Why of its place hidden in the forest? Is there beauty and metaphoric value in its austere architecture? Is there casuality within this happenstance of its existence? What is the reason for being on the common garden? The sense behind the hidden pavilion is to remind us of the political dimension of art and architecture. Uruguay is above all the construction of a political space. It rose an independent nation as a construct destined to mediate, balance, and contain the great powers that in South America represented Brazil and Argentina. Its name reminds us so, being merely the description of a geographic and political space. República Oriental de Uruguay, Republic East of the Uruguay. This small country is the place that a republic that is east of the Rio Uruguay occupies. Its cosmopolitan population also answers to this curious reality. During the construction of modernity, and especially in the 20th and 19th centuries, it has been the heterotopia of European culture. Its Spanish, Italian, German, English, and French colonists found in this country the other space in which to redeem wars and miseries. Le Corbusier captured it perfectly in his passage through Montevideo in 1929. The cosmopolitanism and the cultural nobility of this small nation overpowered him, and so he wrote years later in his famous book, Towards a New Architecture. That could be one of the reasons for the smallest pavilion hidden among the trees in the Giardini to remind us silently, at the times when the major cultural events of the Western world are taking place, that art and architecture are political constructions. The cause of the general curators of the last few Venice Biennales, Aaron Betsky, Kazuyo Sejima, and David Chipperfield, have understood it so and sought to look beyond buildings. The object is recognized as the obscura of architecture's free and creative thought, and their calls invite us to think with another depth, from other registers, with other skies as reference. Architecture beyond buildings. People meet in architecture, and the present, the common ground, seem to refer to one same idea. The small hidden pavilion is a metaphor of that same idea. It represents a country whose capital, Montevideo, is the farthest south of all the capitals of the world, and its austere materiality and thick interiority speak to us of a place that has had in its genetics, cosmopolitan and generous toward the immigrant cultures, its greatest wealth. A place east of a river whose rich political, artistic, educational, and academic practices have allowed it the privilege of occupying a spot in the Giardini. Its most noble vocation could well be to humbly remind us of the ultimate sense of architecture, to be shelter and symbolic space, a means, never an end, a path, never a destination, an open experience, never a polished narrative. The hidden pavilion could well be the Southern Cross in the stellar sky of the Venice Biennales.
It is just to share this reflection about the pavilion and some reflection about in general of architecture. That is all. Thank you.
So let me try to find a way. As sort of, we covered quite a bit of ground, and I think it will be a challenge, sort of to find the connecting stars, so for all these, for all the projects that we have seen. As what I found really interesting, and I think this is also something that we more and more struggle with at the School of Architecture, is that all three architects, really show us how important it is to understand the culture of making and to understand the reality of making architecture, and sort of as it was more or less in the foreground also of the sort of the first two projects that we saw in the first half of the afternoon, as especially David, sort of stressed that point, as a sort of that the truth probably lies also in the making, of that you understand and that you decide on the kind of means that you have, sort of the economy of means versus the let's say the economy of means in the southern hemisphere, and then the economy of means that we have and resources that we have in the north, and also in a wealthier context, and then also this kind of economy of means in terms of abstraction that Federico brought into the debate again, sort of the economy of a diagram, and how far sort of that, and that is something that at least we can train at a school, sort of to understand the power of the diagram of architecture. But I'm in the luxurious position to not to have to think now, because we have two respondents who had the task, sort of to make sense out of to make the connections of what we've heard and seen this afternoon. And so let me just introduce them very, very briefly. Carlos Jimenez, I think, is very well known at this school also. Also, he has been participating in various roles in all Latitudes conferences that we had so far. And last year he was presenting at the Latitudes conference in Sao Paulo. He's a very good architect with practice in Houston, professor at Rice University, and also a very good critic, which is documented in his role as a jury member of the Pritzker Prize jury for many years. So we are, of course, looking forward to his always very thoughtful and deep and poetic comments. And the second respondent of today is Mauricio Paisa from the office, Mauricio Paisa from Elrichshausen. Sophia and Paisa are teaching this semester at the School of Architecture here. They are from They're from Chile, from Concepcion. We had them presenting at the Latitudes conference. When was it? 2 years ago. 2 years ago. And they have a very poetic project at the moment, exhibited in the Royal Albert Museum in London. At the Royal Academy, sorry. Which is a pretty interesting, also it's a very moving project, because it also plays with the different scales. As it's kind of a monumental structure in a small, or in a museum space, as where you don't really know as how this colossal work sort of ever made its way into this space. So I would propose that probably Paisa, that you would start with your comments.
Yeah, I'm going to read the text.
Yeah, I think you have, also maybe, do we have to switch on sort of the mics? They should be on. Yeah, okay.
Okay. Yeah, it's always interesting to see how we are both practicing architects, so we're talking about the work of colleagues. So instead of talking directly and asking some questions that I do have, I'm going to read a text that is general, and it refers to the three cases. It's called poor rich architecture. Beyond the attempt to confine the identities to a rather political national boundary, the transversal and synchronic format of the Latitudes Symposium allows for a unique understanding of the substantial commonalities of the current production of architecture in a broader scale. In other words, every presentation can be simply read as a reciprocal expression of architecture as a shared language. Without deviating to the oftentimes obscure interpretations of the syntax of buildings as representative or communicative entities, what interests me is to unveil a practical phenomenon that seems to be the cause, if not the original source, at least one of its main elements, of the subtle mechanisms under which architecture is being produced today. This phenomenon can be provisionally defined under the notion of double morality, which would as well be underlined as the endless conflict of the poor-rich architecture. Before addressing my questions, I would prefer to frame my definitions. The terms are rather schematic and, of course, very well discussed by prominent artists and philosophers. The notion of morality, in basic words, refers to what is good and bad, to what is right or wrong. The paradox is that the very distinction is extremely relative, especially in the field of architecture, because it presupposes the agreement of a particular set of values. So, there is no critic that would claim that a building is good without describing first the parameters or the references involved in that particular judgment. But the notion of morality has another connotation, a much more problematic implication in the architectural discourses, and especially in the contemporary itinerary of some leading architects. Morality does not only agree with the existence of the right and wrong, but also with the assumption of a certain position about it. Accordingly, the moral architect is the one who embodies the quality of being moral. This is an architect who practices in the name of the right thing to do. Instead of a will to fame or power, or perhaps camouflaged by morality itself, this form of practice has been established at the same ratio as the constitution of the institutions that impart the rules to say what should be good or bad, and therefore how to fight for those noble claims. There is abundant evidence about this fabricated role of the architect in the society. The multiplication of the exchange circuits of creative information with art, architecture, and market in the same bag, together with an inexcusable and seemingly perpetual economical crisis, has turned the discussion from our heavily traditional disciplinary field to a somewhat more relaxed, contradictory, overlap, diffuse, colorful, unhappy, open world of good intentions. In a few words, a kind of positive discriminatory substitution of architecture for the very life that occupies it. In this fashion, it is no surprise that the coverage of the media, the system of awards, and the academic and industrial activities are practically guided by this new political agenda, by this well-intended ideological model. So, instead of talking about the elitist and abstract formal attributes of buildings, we often hear talking about participatory design, social involvements, public programs for poor communities, economy of resources, recycled materials, mass production with almost nothing but virtuous promises. So the morality certainly ends up canceling any possible criticism. Nobody would deny the benefit of a book for an illiterate and a roof for a homeless. But does it mean that one should be ashamed of doing an expensive house, a bank, or a hotel? Does it mean that it would be better to build with adobe and wood than with bronze and marble? And even more skeptically, is the self-celebration of morality an innocuous but explicit design tool to be well respected as a good intended servant of society? Are we still praising architecture as an end in itself, or the means that were necessary to accomplish that ambition? Up to a certain extent, there might be a perverse deviation on this celebrated process, since the focus tends to be in the author as the main actor of the whole enterprise, as that heroic figure of a combative and amusing anecdote. The balance between responsibility and morality, between opportunity and propaganda, is undeniably delicate. In the well-known text written by Lost at the beginning of the previous century, the poor little rich man told to the architect, "Bring me art, under my own roof. Money doesn't matter." But we all know the unhappy life of the rich man in his perfect and totally complete inhabited work of art. But this apology should be understood as a double morality, because the lack of art in favor of the opinions of the poor man could equally result in an unhappy historical end. In a continental survey, is it possible to talk about architecture without discriminating either the price of the materials, the involvement in the execution of, or the public nature of the commission? That is to say, not to talk about the conditions, but about the translation of those conditions into an architectonic space. So, instead of claiming morality, I would rather return to the principle of ethics, the very ethos of basic architecture.
Thank you very much. Well, I think you also, as a sort of, there are immediately sort of the keywords that we probably will carry through this discussion, you know, sort of the moral, the need for morality, economy, you know, sort of the circumstances as of the rich and poor, and of course this kind of utopian element. Carlos, would you like to add on immediately, if you can?
I wish I was as prepared as Mauricio, but I just wanted to offer some reflections primarily about the three presenters. First, I am always delighted, as Barbara commented, to participate in any form or fashion that my colleagues here at the University of Texas admit me. And it's always a privilege to reflect on the nature of this America that becomes bigger the more we understand its multiple latitudes and its several longitudes. And I think that it's very refreshing to hear today three speakers who are also very interesting writers, no? Because architects have to write their stories. They have to tell the stories in a language, in a format that benefits their sensibility, but also communicates their ideas. And we started with a very intriguing, young, audacious, partial revolutionary, partial constructor, animator, of activator, I would say more than animator, of social justice in places where that might not be happening. And we noticed that he divides his presentation in very three clear chapters. Three clear chapters that gives us evidence that hope can actually be multiplied as if there were some kind of biblical fish that gets to be the benefit to those that inhabit this place along the waters of Ecuador. And I was very captivated by this enthusiasm, which is something that we miss in schools of architecture, this enthusiasm to take action in making a difference in those that are less privileged. And this amazing idea that happens with the vocation of a client intersecting the vocation of an architect is fundamental for the future of architecture. That teacher who saw the despair of children growing without education propels him to make the first effort and to find an architect to intersect that effort with equal passion. It's very amusing that later Jimmy, the fisherman, takes that lesson even further with great amusement, but also with a great sense of pride. So an architecture as delicate and as minimal as a house for learning called Casa de la Esperanza, it ignites that condition. Later, we moved farther north. We left the equator and we went to that amazing metropolis, Toronto. And we discovered through the work of Betsy Williamson this fascinating dilemma that has always been at the key of Latitude. What is an American architecture? This is something that has always propelled this search to these conferences. What is an American architecture? Some claim more America than others. Others might have less of it. Others might have more of it. Regardless of the conditions of the economies, there is an awareness that we are at the presence of an architecture that is perhaps singular in the world. And I think Betsy struck something today that was very important when she spoke about the relationship of an architecture that is able to measure itself in the spectacular condition of space. If you look at other parts of the world, that condition exists. But in the Americas, there is this power of landscape and how architecture witnesses and participates in this landscape. This was evident in her presentation with great eloquence, how she went about illustrating the violence of this insertion in a landscape to recuperate that landscape through architecture. This was a very tangible and an amazing lesson, pedagogical lesson about the fact that architecture must negotiate this dilemma of the site and at the same time its enormous responsibility to return it as if nothing ever happened. This was indeed a great lesson that she was willing to give to us. And then we completed with that, we moved suddenly south again in this latitudinal sort of voyage, 3 presenters. And we learned something about the stamina and the kind of enthusiasm of Uruguayans. I was not aware of Federico's work, and certainly his manner of presentation as he shared this party that suddenly became a party, or sometimes the party became the party. It didn't matter because there was this incredible, I would say, contagiousness in the love that he propelled in his presentation. It was slightly schizophrenic at times. I must admit that I was trying to follow his many points, but what was so exciting was to see this generous and very innate love of making architecture. And that sense of contagiousness really tied the three together. These were 3 presenters that obviously love what they do. It was obvious. They are intrigued. They are committed to an architecture that resolves issues that might be at hand, but also dreams constantly of a better place to inhabit.
As what I thought, as when we ask the Latitudes participants to reduce their presentation maybe to one project only, so there is not necessarily, as we don't ask them to present a small house or so, but in a way it is interesting, sort of how the essential or sort of the kind of core of one's own research or so tends to be found in the small projects. As a sort of, that is something that we might want to discuss later, but I think as a, besides you, so where you made the point as a sort of like, let's leave aside sort of the conventional architectural production and let's see, so what one can do if it's really just essential. I would like to push that point a little bit in your, as a sort of in Betsy's and Federico's presentation, because they voluntarily choose the small projects, the residential building, to show the sort of the experimental level that is still there. And again, sort of it's the question of craftsmanship and sort of this kind of knowledge that you have to have as an architect in order to make something meaningful and relevant, and something that's also relevant as sort of this keyword that Paisa was bringing up to the table. And so this relevance, you, Federico, with your this almost case study houses, as Eames case study houses, and then sort of the careful journey, sort of that Betsy allowed us, sort of to follow that, sort of to follow the process of construction, and how you have to understand what you do in order to understand the economy of means, and sort of that the knowledge of craftsmanship and of doing allows for these kind of poetic elements, the stair, the shelter, and so on. And then that knowledge, that craftsmanship, that understanding of craftsmanship, in the end, is also then the art of building. Sort of that is sort of what I think what is also new in the past, so that this shared experience that you basically put in the center of your presentation, so that it's not so much about the end product or so, or sort of that there is maybe there is a kind of a scheme at the beginning, and then with the help of the craftsmen, I don't know, sort of, I'm not asking sort of how this labor is coming into place, but so it's this kind of social work. So it's a work of art. It's a shared work of art, and I think there, I would like to ask you, of how really relevant sort of this knowledge and this kind of understanding of craftsmanship, or how relevant that is for your architecture, because I think that is something that goes beyond the modern tradition that we have. So words like collecting industrial products, assembling them, but there is this moment of making is so important. And I would just like you to maybe especially stress that point, and maybe Betsy could start.
I'm happy to start talking about that. I think the way we became architects is likely very different, where I had a very long internship after graduating from school with two very highly skilled and architects who do really beautiful work. And so part of how I came to the idea of that making is important is because it came from the architect that I interned with for about 8 or 9 years before I opened my own practice. What I want to maybe back up and start with is that I think there's a real similarity in the projects that we show, whether the budget is $200 or I'll not disclose the budget of the house that I did, but it's relative to Toronto, it was not huge. But what's important, I think, in all the projects is the clients, came to each of us, and we were a very nascent firm when Merle and her family came to us. The clients are trusting you with everything they've got. And so whether it's $200 or $12,000 or more than that, as a young firm, like building the trust between your client, whether it's a community or a private commission, and you making the most of everything they've got is probably why some of these small projects become so poignant for our firms, where David may go off to build schools that are 100 times the budget, that are beautiful projects in different communities, but there will always be something very special about the one that he presented today, because it really defines you as a practice and you as a person, and how you deal with this great responsibility that we have. And so when you talk about craftsmanship and how that comes in, I think we all have our own personal histories about how we got there. But one thing that I'm always incredibly respectful of on our construction sites is that no matter where the contractors come from, they all have built a level of expertise in a way that we try to tap into. And it's about building a relationship and getting everyone excited about the project, so that when it comes to doing the difficult things that have to happen, some things are really straightforward. Pouring the foundation was relatively easy. There's, framing is not, rocket science. So in the projects that I showed today. But when it came to the level of detail that we're trying to get in and where the care really matters, it takes that long building that relationship from the very beginning of the project. So showing that you have trust in them is first and foremost. And one of the first things that we ask when we get onto a construction site, especially if it's in a rural area, not in downtown Toronto, where it's a very different market, it's what do you do well and what do you not do well. And so we knew up in Frogs Hollow that they had very good carpenters, finished carpenters and rough carpenters. So we knew we had a lot of latitude in terms of the work with wood that we were doing on site. The stair, for example, was originally designed on the back side, so not the curved piece, to all be done in drywall because the budget was small and drywall was really cheap. We thought we would just do a nice reveal detail and call it a day. The contractor came to us and said, there's no way we can pull that off. Our drywall guys are terrible here. And so he said, well, we have great carpenters. Why don't you do it in wood? And so that's where that's what drove part of the design for the other side of that piece. And as well with the milled siding, what we didn't, kind of tell the installer before it was shipped to the site was you're going to have to countersink a screw plug and then chisel the wood plug on top of the screw to the exact curvature of wherever it happens to hit on this milled board. So there's 300 and some odd boards, and the screws were all lined up perfectly, and then they had to plug each one, chisel it, and then stain it to match with the Swedish barn paint that we specified. And that's not something done that's not quick or easy or cheap by any means, but it took knowing that they could really pull it off to be able to complete it, even though we take the credit for the fabrication of the siding. How it went up and how it's put together really is in someone else's hands.
David, would you like to respond?
It's very interesting because how relevant is the artisan process in our architecture? Maybe the answer that you will expect is very important for us, but it isn't. The most important thing that you have to understand first is our context. For us, artisan process isn't an option. We are not a industrialized country. Our construction process aren't very technical. We are very, very primitive in construction systems. And when I was studying, when we are studying architecture, for us was very hard understand this reality, this context, because we began the school in 1989, and Latin America isn't in like now. Now Latin American is in. It's very, 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 very fashion. Now being Latin American is very, very fashionable around the world. But these years, it isn't. Nobody cares about Latin America. Our history classes, our theory classes, our analysis classes was always referred to North America, Europe, and Japan. And we born and we learn all of this information, and we have a lot of frustration when we began to work in the reality, because we thought that in all of the world there are Swiss manpower who built in a perfect way all of the buildings. But when we faced the reality, first the frustration. We can build like all of the information that we learn, all of the architects that we admire. So maybe we can be an architect, so maybe we can be like them. Maybe this profession or this area of knowledge isn't for a country like us. This is our first shock. Then we need to relearn and erase and reset all of our information that we learned. That's why for us was very, very important to create this reset process, to understand what is relevant in our country and what is important. We don't choose to work with artisan process. It's the only option that we have. So if we only have these options, how we could take advantage of this option? And this is when our mind change, and this is when we understand and consider that the artisans or the craftsmanship is important, and we have the responsibility to take an advantage of that knowledge because it's our identity, it's part of our DNA. So when you don't choose, it's very interesting because you are not taking, you are not selecting. Always select one is good and one is bad. Is for us is very uncomfortable. It's better if you have the clear option. So and let me see. Yeah, I lost it. Wait. So in our case, our architecture is completely related to the context. If someday we we will work in other conditions where Switzerland, maybe our work isn't like with the artisan focus. Maybe we try to understand very clear the context and the precision. Maybe our words will be very, very precise and everything very neat.
Yeah, but as a, sort of now let me be a little bit provocative, as because you mentioned your mentor and teacher, Jose Maria Saez, and he is trying, sort of to do, as a, really to find a balance between, let's say, something that's a ready-made or a module, so that's really that one can do, let's say, at home, sort of in the workshop, and then sort of it's repeated and it's it becomes a very abstract composition, while sort of the project that you choose to show today also has that kind of context or man-made or handmade as a metaphorical layer, and this is sort of where I think as a where it becomes really interesting, sort of where the two worlds maybe at the moment, because it's fashionable or it's a trend, and this is why we have to talk about it, really address that post-modern aspect of the, fatto al mano, and sort of, and I think this is something that we remember, Pesa, when we looked at your project, sort of where people also said like it's a concrete building, and then you give it a kind of a handmade or let's say a more rougher and subjective structure. And I think this is something that's also interesting on an aesthetic metaphorical level, because we also addressed that, so Federico addressed that also very clearly, that there is a need for metaphors and for, so as because you were also very subtle, as saying like, yeah, it's just a diagram, so something very rational and sort of da 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 da. This is sort of how the volumes fit together. But in the end, so if you're talking about how this is creating poetry and metaphor is something that we are at the moment all really looking into or after, or so. So that's just a provocation for the.
I think it's a pity there are not so many students here because I saw a lot of students to discuss that a little. But no, in this sense and in the sense of David comments, I think proportions or these common sense values or the sun of the wind it's not depend on the budget, it's not depend on the latitude. So I think this is the nice thing to see that geometry, proportions, and this value you can see in the school of David and in the house of. And so it's intelligent and how you want to be excellent in what you are doing. It's not so. In our latitudes, we have a great opportunity if we saw the sea instead of a problem. I think Latin America is a nice opportunity. When you arrive, you say, "Oh, the great things." I see that uh, young architect like us, we have immediately can test what we think and with what and we can do. So this is a very nice opportunity. If we see instead of a restriction, we can see also our latitude like a nice opportunity or different. Obviously, in it depends on the latitude, but no, I only want to see that this value, also the honorarium that perceives an architect, I think is not relevant. It's important. It's ethically important but this abstract value, I think is the important thing. Any latitude, any climate, and we don't be frustrated of that. In the reverse, we have to be lucky to see like an opportunity. But, okay, it's difficult
Yes.
the English.
We don't work with CNC machines because we hate technology. It's very simple. We don't work because we don't have it. We don't have access to this technology in Ecuador. And it's very interesting when you could see that this technology is used in a very in an interesting way, in a very good way, like the projects like Bitsy, because sometimes people thought that we are fundamentalists with this thing of artificials or technological things, but we isn't. It's only we only work with what we have at hand. And maybe if we have other things or other resources, we work with the other resources. We work with everything we thought. We always are trying to understand the trying to do a map of resources that we have in the specific conditions. Yeah? We don't have any prejudice about anything.
You know, I like the word opportunity that you were using because your Davis practice reminds me of the PS, totally off the subject, but the PS1 installation that Interborough did, where they went and did the survey of all the community groups around the museum and said, well, what do you need? And someone said a ping pong table or a chair or a movie projector, and then they spent the entire budget for the PS1 installation on all these things and basically put them in the courtyard. It said, this is what the community needs. This is our architectural project. Now, in, say 15 years ago, no one would have thought that would have been an architectural project. In the same way that, building a thatch school for $200, you don't think of that as the architectural project. But something that maybe I could try to tie our practices together, or all three of them, in a sense is as a young architect, you can't wait for your work to walk in the door. You have to go out and make your work and engage your community, whatever it is, to find projects that with which you can establish a practice. And so, in our office, we talk a lot about it would be really great if everyone came to us with the schematic design, the budget, the program, kind of where you start in school projects, and you can move from there to construction. But so many clients come to us in the space before they even get to that and says, I'd love to have a house, but I don't have a site, or I have a piece of land, as in we did a large master plan for a prototypical food community called Abbey Gardens. They said, we have access to an abandoned quarry, but we don't know what to do with it. What are your thoughts? And so I see David's practice as operating in this space before you get to site, program, budget, and kind of the more real things. And I think that's something that potentially you referenced in your opening comments here, is that around the globe now, there's architecture practices. One's called Mass Group, that was started by two Harvard students that built in Africa, in communities where architects weren't involved previously. And so, like you said, it's nearly impossible to be critical of a project when so much good is happening. Or Canada's submission to this year's Venice Biennale is called Arctic Adaptations, that talks about Nunavut, which is a 15-year-old it became its own community 15 years ago by the Canadian government. And the project is about food resources in the Arctic. Again, they're projects that you can't criticize because they're just doing so much good, and they're so good. But they occupy the space before the typical or the real project happens. And even in a practice like mine and in yours as well, like there's ways that you try to endeavor to shape how maybe moral or how your approaches to these projects try to define who you are as an architect. And so I think it's your approach to, say, a teacher from a beach community who doesn't have a lot of resources that shapes what you do as an architect, no matter if it's a beach community or a private home or a large master plan for a garden community or whatever it happens to be. But I see that our work is being potentially much more similar in that way, kind of what happens before the real project starts.
Wilfried.
You can also, you want to come here? Yeah.
I think that maybe it's just the right moment, because Betsy is making a kind of a connection to the two big gorillas in the room. One is David Barragan's very provocative presentation, and Mauricio's response, which sort of is kind of a very elegant but big slap in David's face, in the sense of, how can we, Betsy, you mentioned it, how can we criticize things that are initially based on such good intentions? And I would say that, there's been a kind of very what's the word, holier than thou position in many of these discourses in the last few years. Andres Lepik at the Museum of Modern Art did an exhibition on this particular subject and invited a number of architects, and we all looked at their work and we all said, well, great. And Francis Didier Quéré, how can you criticize that kind of initiative? Somebody who collects money in Germany and other places and then builds schools in some of the poorest places in the world, and the buildings are quite good, but they're not, you wouldn't say they're excellent, but they're pretty good, right? How do we take on at the School of Architecture a way of judging these kinds of things? And I think if we come back to the issue of craftsmanship, and David is very honest about his aspirations as an architect. He's given the opportunity to design something in Switzerland, he would take it. That's to say, is that a disappointing reaction? It's an honest reaction. There would be some people who would say, if I were a Robespierre or a kind of a hardline revolutionary, I would say, well, off with your head, David, because you're a traitor to the cause. You should give your life to improving the standards of living of the poor, and not ever consider working in Switzerland, right? Because that's kind of betrayal of your original qualities that your first projects exhibit. Let me make a kind of segue. I mean, when we looked at the early work of Zumthor, we all thought, well, what a great architect. You know, here is a person using skills of the local communities and very precise. It's all small scale. It's kind of a, but it's not this high tech stuff. It's not as pristine as Italian. Well, anyway, it ends up this fetishistic detailing Scarpa. You know, okay. But of course, it's my moment of Alzheimer. No, Scarpa, you know. And so when Zumthor then does other things, and people say, well, you know, he's sort of left his original foundations, and everybody was sort of disappointed. One wonders how romantic our views are of how architects' ideologies should remain pure and untainted. So I'm not condoning the kind of revolutionary spirit which you brought in your presentation. I'm not sort of celebrating it. What I'm celebrating is the fact that what Betsy recognized, the necessity for architects to engage, and to what extent the moral issues become resolved in the work is really quite relative. You know, it depends on which context, political context, and you know, you care to draw the circle. And so I think what remains for all of us, whether we're students or whether we're architects, we have to resolve these issues of what the role of skills are, what the roles of technologies are in construction, and what the moral dimensions, the ethical and moral dimensions of technology and craftsmanship are, because they do have those moral and ethical dimensions. And we have to review our own aspirations. What are our own personal aspirations? Is one of the principal motivating forces that drives our, you know, our work, that we want to become Pritzker Prize winners? Or is one of the motivation that we want to become famous, regardless of Pritzker, or we want to become rich? Or do we want to achieve some sense of satisfaction for a community or an individual client? So where are these aspirations located? And between the interpretation of the skills that we use, which include craftsmanship and technology, and aspirations, you know, it's the question of discipline. How do we discipline the tools and technologies and the compositional skills that we have at our hand, and marry that with the aspirations that we have as individuals? And that is a very personal trajectory, and something that you have to resolve between yourself and, if you believe in God, God. If you don't believe in God, choose your judge. But I'm not making any personal judgment of that. However, these are the parameters, and we all have to come clean at some stage or other, become conscious and become aware of these parameters that we have at our hand, at our disposal. And we live at the moment, in most parts of the world, in situations where we can make those kinds of decisions. There are others that cannot make those kinds of decisions in other parts of the world.
Can I?
Sure.
Because I think it's very interesting, your summary, Will, because I think what ties the three architects this afternoon in terms of a common lineage, since the word common ground, common sense, all these commonalities were brought out, is the efficacy of the architect. This is what is so relevant in their propositions, because if I keep thinking back of Betsy's project which at the end I could care less if it costs $1 million or $1,000. It has nothing to do with the value of the work. In the same way that I couldn't, I mean, I laugh at the $200, and I'm glad that it was a fantastic story. But beyond that, it's just a story. The reality is that each architect is confronted with a very precise set of demands. And either you maintain that level of hope so that the client can have that sense of faith on someone that is going to contribute to their lives. And I think the commonality that exists between these three practices resides in that kind of, even in the hippie colony of Punta del Este, you know, that they were entrusting somebody to not just be a purveyor of products or shapes that simply continue to populate the world without much sense. They're just products that you buy. But this idea that the architect incites reflection, incites action through the activities that are proper of architects, which is to make a difference. And that to me is the highest value, the highest commodity you can have in any work of architecture. It doesn't come with a price tag.
Josh.
I'm going to potentially bring up something that everyone might be a little afraid to bring up, which is the God-given ability that the three of you have to create magical artistic spaces and buildings. So the question I have, and I'll give an example with David's project, the first project, because and by the way, all of your presentations were remarkable, so huge kudos, as is the work. But just for example, there's a leap that each one of you took on your projects which you did not talk about, which is, for example, in David's, when you did this beautiful analysis of the efficiency of the rectangular form of the school. And then you did this equally beautiful analysis of what the teacher asked for, which was a hexagonal form. For very practical reasons, it should have been hexagonal, for the performance of the classroom. And then you made this magical leap to a third form without explaining why. It was incredibly efficient for them to build, and it's exquisitely beautiful. But there's an artistic leap that you took that you skipped over. And I'm dying to know what that leap was. And in each one of the other, Betsy's and Federico's projects, there's a leap that all of you skip over, which is potentially what you can't teach. Because there's this incredibly rational process that every great architect can explain a project with great rationality. And the more systems to their rationality, the more legitimate it is. Except for the fact that they're incredibly artistically talented. If your buildings looked like crap at the end, you wouldn't be up there. You could have a beautiful rationale, but if your building isn't a beautiful building in the end, I guarantee you're not up there. So if every one of you can talk a little bit about that magical leap that is made, and at what point in the process, it's happening throughout the process, I realize. But does that start to hit it at something that's incredibly intuitive and artistic? And for those of you who have kids or will have kids, I'm fascinated by this process that happens when your 2-year-old son is creating beautiful, artistic, intuitive projects that blow everything else that I've seen and what I've ever made away, and then they lose it. They lose it at about 4. And you spend your whole life trying to regain what you had at 2 years old, which is a God-given ability to create and compose and make. And each one of you have it, and you're getting closer and closer to your 2-year-old self, but you're not talking about it. So if you can just mention a little bit about that.
Who wants to talk about that? Who wants to share the real story.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you the answer that's not an answer, which is it starts to look right at a certain point, and and that's the point at which you stop. But I mean, you know, there's another analogy with kids drawing. It's like children could be draw really well. You have to know when to take the paper away because eventually they'll just keep going over and over and over and over, and then kind of mess everything up. So my version of when you take the paper away is having two really excellent partners that are very good at editing. Shane in particular is a very, very good editor. And there's a point at which you sort of start to fall in love with part of your project, and oftentimes you fetishize it, and then it gets overworked, and you don't realize that you need to pull back, which is why you need good people around you to talk to about how to get the project back to its essence. And the other idea that you mentioned a lot is abstraction, where we you know, not every architect does, but we really work hard to make things abstract because it's never going to be built maybe as perfectly as you think. And so if you can really hang on to maybe one great kind of moment of abstraction or piece of it, it tends to ripple through the project and kind of hide all the other things that you're trying to, you know, make sure no one really focuses on. But for me, it's about having partners who are excellent editors.
David. Yeah. Fernando, yeah, please.
I think I need to come in defense of David a little bit. And Carlos' comment at the end of his last intervention brought me back to my school days because I had a teacher who asked exactly that question in every review, and he used to terrorize us. He used to ask, what good is your project doing for the world? And if you can't answer that, he would just come heavy on you. And no, but it's an important question. We should not judge architecture only by that. I think that's what Peso is trying to say. I mean, it's not only the morals that should be used to value architecture, but that said, there's an ethic in what Alborde does that I think it's really, really interesting, and we should explore and debate more. You guys are basically pushing the limits of what architecture can be. I'm sure you can take some of that and bring it to Switzerland or take it elsewhere and keep pushing the envelope. And to me, the best compliment to their work is not the beautiful school, is not the participatory process that is really interesting. It's on Jimmy's house. That somebody in that community learns something from your building and try to imitate it. To me, that's the really big compliment. It's a really big transformation that I think that community will have. They became aware that they can build better and different. And that probably is the best transformation that we can put out in the world.
Yeah.
Quick, I'm not criticizing the morality in itself. I'm just highlighting the fact that it's different to be self-celebrating of a sense of morality. It's different, and because by doing that, you are at the same time, as a consequence, as a collateral damage, you are also validating a political model that perhaps is something that I don't know if you should be doing in schools for $200. That's my point, and so it's I think it's much more.
I wanted to add to that because I really appreciated what you said earlier, Pedro, but I actually had a very different understanding of what you were saying. And I mean, I admire, you know, this is this elephant in the room, right, that Wilfred brought up. Gorilla, sorry. Two gorillas, right, okay. Mixing metaphors. there's a quote that I like very much from Gertrude Stein in 1935 when she delivered that lecture, What is English Literature? She says something, I think this is the quote, it is awfully important to know what is and what is not your business. And I feel like for architects, that's incredibly important as well. I mean, there's no doubt that the work that David does is important. The work that you were talking about in Africa is important. There is extraordinary stuff there. But when you go beyond virtuous promises, which is I think your phrase, there's this issue about what is your business. I think Joshua was trying to get at that with like you were referring to a kind of magical moment of design. I mean, for me, like I completely enjoyed. I don't disagree with you, Fernando, that it's amazing that lessons were brought forth that makes all of their lives better when Jimmy takes on his own design. But it's actually not the same as that incredible social space that was made through the design, through the constructive way in which you put the tripods together and clad that amazing kind of longhouse of kind of social space. Like that's the business of architecture. And I feel like when Paisa, when you returned at the end of your written piece to the desire to return to ethics, like it seemed to me that the important point there was that you were saying beyond being virtuous, beyond trying to do good in the world in general, there are specific ways in which architecture does good in the world. And to me, that's knowing what that business is actually the key issue. It's nothing to suggest that being a virtuous person isn't incredibly important, but that's not dependent on whether you're working in Switzerland or in Ecuador, and it's not dependent on money. Like to identify the way in which like Betsy's building is significant in the way it kind of, I can't remember how you put it, but you had a way of phrasing that the consequence of the building was about, but being able to kind of measure the landscape and the landscape measuring you, or maybe it was Carlos talking about your work, that somehow this sort of spectacular landscape is domesticated and then measured against your experience of it, is actually the business of architecture. It comes through making, but I think the point that I like so much about what Paisa was saying is that it all too often gets confused with this kind of virtuous desire to be a good person. And then, it's uncriticizable, but it's not like it's necessarily good.
Wait, you know what it really reminds me of is I was in graduate school in the mid-90s, and that's when digital work started to bubble up. And it's almost the exact same question that you asked about this type of work, where how do you criticize it if it's so new and no one really knows what the end game is? You don't really know how far you can go. And so when projects were done digitally and really early on with renderings, there was just so much praise for the technological capacity of architects to have absorbed this technology from other areas. And so it was in the same way that this type of work that we're talking about, the morality of, is in a new frontier, potentially kind of like a new place for architects to work. In the mid-90s, the digital sphere was so new, and was also kind of a new place that architects were working. So I think it's, maybe I'll just postulate that it's because we don't have enough of it out there. There isn't enough discussion. So now we can look at a built work that's like highly sculptural and evocative, and we kind of know if it's a good one or not at this point, because there's so much that's been done and it's pervasive. And maybe it just is something that will take time, where the people who are quite advanced and kind of can push it forward and kind of maintain doing beautiful things. I mean, I thought that the composition of the tripods was really, really beautiful, and then the spaces that all get created. I mean, whether that was built in concrete or thatch or wood or whatever, it still would have been a really beautiful space. Like that's where we can talk about how the money doesn't matter. Well,
I want to
Federico, yeah.
I think it's a very interesting discussion, but I think we have different vision of what architecture it is. And I think Kevin put in the table this strong, and we can discuss what is architecture, or what
It's our business.
What is our business? I think it's very strong, the question also, because on one way, David provocative said, okay, architecture is not a perfect object. Perhaps for David is to create energy. For him, it's a different vision because of perhaps. So, what I not so agree with this, also only with this to create a process. So, I think it's a very nice debate, very deep, and what what an object or what values are necessary to consider one thing architecture, or is I always remember the question of this professor Garcia Pardo that asked, okay, all the literature of the world is made by A, B, C, D. All the music of the world, rock and Beethoven is made by do, re, mi, fa. Okay, there exists some element that we can recognize to consider one building is, it could be a building, a simply construction, but it could be considered architecture. But it's only the object, is the process. What is architecture? I think it's a very nice debate that is on the table. And I think David is also talking about the architecture is perhaps create energy most than the perfect object. I think, but in the other hand, I'm not sure it's only this. I think there are some values that I try to rationalize, but it's difficult. That in this topic, that sun, wind, proportion, I am trying to search what are these elements, or I think these values are very important to discover with abstraction. It's for that we are investigating this in this sense. But I think there is a nice discussion here, David. Please help.
Yeah, I mean, of course, as we are sort of in a phase where, you know, architects are pushing the boundaries once again, and we're sort of becoming a political, or having a political position is also not, you know, sort of political incorrect, as because we came, you know, so from an era, let's say the 90s, were not exactly the political phases of architecture, right? As so we just have to recognize it. We have also to understand if it's just a local issue, you know, sort of like that, if this is a South American issue because there is a, you know, so if you have to make up for something, or is there something that's larger, you know, so where architects can also conquer new fields and reconquer fields. But I think Wilfried was, sorry, yeah, David. And then you, okay.
We are always asking ourselves what is ethic built or not in a specific context. We always try to be free of any prejudice, and that's why, for us, it is in the main part, it's important, the location of the client, of the program. It doesn't matter if we work with government projects or private projects, or we are designing a big house or a small house, because we are understand when we are choosing a project, or when we are deciding to work in any project, what are we looking for is what we could do with this opportunity, or what else we can do with this project. I wanna be more extreme with the debate. What if we receive an invitation to work in Middle East? More complicated. Switzerland? No, Middle East. It's pertinent to think about how to build in Middle East. We're very critical with these conditions, and of course it's in a specific context, and of course Middle East need to build. But the question is how to work in very specific context and take out of our minds all of that that information of preconceived ideas or this judging. And we try to not to judge the client, and for us this is very important. Of course, there is an ethic involved and a political thinking, but maybe when we are for us now it's very hard these situations because we are very exposed and we have a lot of things that happen at the same time, and we are always work, do and think and do and think, and always are producing and try to be very critical. But we don't have to afraid to do mistakes. Maybe if we do, if all our life is accumulation of mistakes, maybe it's worth it because we prefer to walk instead of be out of the be out of be an audience. We prefer be the actors and prefer to be the audience. And we always do everything with a lot of trying to be very conscious of all the implications, but always very open to the all of things that could happen later.
I think very interesting. The words you use in terms of thinking about your projects, both in terms of audience and actor, and that you prefer to be the actor. We look at buildings from the point of view, is the building itself in relation to the intentions by the architects and the needs that the clients gave to the architects, is the building itself a good project? But we can also look at it from the point of view, is the building giving us a model for practice for ourselves and for the rest of the world? In other words, is it paradigmatic? Is the building capable of sending a message to the rest of the world? So here, Alborde received a prize 2 years ago, the Schelling Award, which was 20,000 euros, not a bad sum of money. You stood against two other architects, one office from London and another from Germany. And the response by those many students who were there at the time that the results were declared was completely enthusiastic. They were absolutely in tune with what the jury had decided. Why? Because the context in which Alborde was chosen is one in which we have a global economic crisis, and for an architecture award to be given to a practice that is doing what you have been doing in your early work, right? I'm not saying what you should be doing for the rest of your lives, but at least for the work that has been published and that you presented in Karlsruhe in Germany at the time, it was sending out a signal. We have a global economic crisis, which in Southern Europe, in Ireland, on the edges of Europe, in Ireland, Portugal, Spain, Italy, Greece, has brought about unemployment rates of an incredible scale. In Spain, 50% of the young people are unemployed. So what do architects do who have basically no work? And there have been many architects in Spain who have not just tried to do what you're doing, I mean, sort of, almost building from scraps. They actually tried to go out into communities to generate things for their own existence, as it were. So what I'm saying is that while I agree with Mauricio's analysis and critique, I think we have to recognize that we are living in a world where the turbo-capitalism, and I use that term very specifically, has resulted in the production, overproduction of certain kinds of buildings, and architecture, the architectural industry has become involved in that to such an extent that we are complicit to the degree that we have lost our sense of ethics. And because of that, because we've been cultivating this kind of image, museums, and yet another museum, cultural centers, villas. These things are building typologies which are not exactly talking about satisfying primary needs, like health and education, primary shelters. So architecture of the Western world, of the Northern Hemisphere, has focused on excessive aspects of tasks. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be doing theaters and so on, but in Germany, in Berlin, when we have the task of designing the 143rd museum, right, and everybody's sort of clamoring and wanting to become the architect for that. Yes, that's fine, but let's also think about some of the other problems that exist in society. And let's say even in German society, which, as wealthy as it is, we have some major problems. We have problems of illiteracy, of health, etc., which we're not focusing on. So there is a political debate, and there is an ethical debate, and there is a kind of a value judgment that we have to make as architects to say, what are our specific personal aspirations and what are our collective aspirations as architects, and how should we try to steer the debate so that we get a situation where, yes, we recognize individual qualities of houses, holiday homes, and things like that. We can talk about that on a very rational level, but we should also focus on those issues that require us to refocus as to what the primary tasks are before we complete the tertiary and quaternary tasks. So that's I think that would be my kind of an attempt to try and resolve. On the one hand, the model that Alborde's work represents, the way that you presented it today, and the kind of valid criticism that you make in terms of to what extent should we fetishize the moral aspect of projects and therefore inoculate the debate about quality.
Can I add something? I totally agree with Wilfred's observation, and especially in the fact that you are distinguishing between the model for the architect as the model for himself or herself, and the model as something that he can present to the world as a reference, as a model for the world, which is very ambitious. And I think that it's so relative, because I know for facts and for experience that some of the architects that are working, it's very sad to say, that are working for this social cost building with almost nothing, then they go to very expensive restaurants and they buy very expensive shoes, and so I think that it's a dilemma much more complicated than the polarity between working for oneself or for others. I think it's, of course, it's a reaction to the excess of the beginning of the 21st century, which is clear, and I think it's very fair to us architecture to go back to the very ethic of being economical, because that's part of what architecture does, to organize an economy, organize materials, and but to celebrate it, to celebrate the scarcity, to celebrate that, and to self-promote that, I think it's a tricky consequence, a sad consequence of the reaction to the excess of the beginning of the century. And that's, I know several cases that are really doing social housing or doing building with mud, celebrating the dirty hands and clean consciousness, but then they go to, I don't want to tell more, but
I think, I think, so Carlos mentioned it at the beginning of his remarks, so that we are all architects who build and also architects who write, and who are also part of a larger discourse, and it's in our hands, sort of where we steer this discourse, in which direction. And I think this has to be reviewed and revised also every, sometimes as a sort of sudden, but let's say every decade or every 5 years, it has to be constantly reviewed, let's put it this way. And it's our responsibility, sort of which kind of problems or issues or observations we bring into the newspapers, if we just leave it to the journalists, if we still connect sort of to that discourse, or if we have this escapism, so that just talks about our own work and so on and so forth. And I think this is exactly the kind of context, sort of a school has the time and the possibility, sort of to invest a little bit into it, as with these kind of symposia, which are not paid by someone, sort of like AT&T behind us, or you know what I mean. As a sort of, this is what we create, or what we, sort of what we want to discuss, architects. And I think this is really important, and that's why we should also use these formats, sort of as a sort of to that we leave these symposia more knowledgeable than we entered them, and sort of to understand a little bit also this global discourse. Sort of, this is another question we probably can touch tomorrow, as a sort of this concept of internationalism and so on and so forth, as because we are still, sort of in the stereotypes of modernism, of internationalism, and so and so and so forth. And so that's why I really, sort of like sort of that kind of very special and very specific contribution, just as a kind of a starting point for a larger, sort of that we know where we stand, each one of us. I think as a sort of, sort of, it was, we really used that time. If there is let's say concluding remarks, and then I would like you all to be invited, to feel invited for a reception, which brings also another party that is reviewing our schools. Of the advisory council is here at our school, and so that is an opportunity, sort of to merge these two events. I think the reception is taking place in the south lobby, because there was a kind of we wanted to have it in the courtyard, but there was a possibility of rain, so it's in the south lobby. And then there is also something that I would just like to tell our participants. We have a chance to visit the courthouse tomorrow morning by Scoggin, as Max Scoggin and Meryl Elam. And we would organize, sort of a tour there, but it's really early. As it's like they receive us at 8:30. So I just wanted to let you know this, because then we would pick you up at the hotel, and maybe you could just give me a feedback after or during the dinner, so after dinner. How many of you would really be interested? As sort of, it's the courthouse, and then afterwards we would see the Charles Moore's last house, as his residence, and there but sort of the courthouse that is set, and it's early. So,
I wanted, it's just that you provoked something earlier which intrigues me, which is, you know, uh, the ideology of capitalism, of communism. You know, there was a time when things were very clear somehow. Today, we really are inhabiting for the first time, perhaps, in a world that dominates through promoting wants. This is what our world has become. Everybody wants something. And I think the lessons imparted in the projects that we saw today in their best expression is that our needs might be very few, and it is the role of architects to exert this critical dimension about what they do. And if we're going to survive as a kind of future practice of action and activation in the world, we have to recognize that this is the crisis we're living with. And this is a crisis that populates all the Americas. You go to Montevideo, you go to Buenos Aires, you go to Asunción, and you will find this mad desire to just have wants. And our proposition as critical thinkers is not about a region or the world, it's about how we exert that potential. The lesson about the small school La Esperanza is not to do with the budget. That's actually a humorous dimension and a reality too. I love the way David told the story as if it was, as I said, 3 chapters in a narrative. But the critical lesson is the intelligence, the sharpness, the laser quality of an architect that disseminates an idea and makes the future of these children, 8 children, another possibility. The school might dissipate, the wind will come and take it away, but it will not take away that power. And I think if we have a future, has to do with understanding this critical dimension that architects brings to the world. And it's you know, I personally in my own practice, I'm always fighting with clients with this idea of wants and needs. And my first question is always, what do you need? But they always say what I want. And that's always a dilemma. And so we try to work with the quality of the work to make last in terms of its constructive value. So there is many dimensions to this. And I think in today's participation of the 3 speakers, we began to understand this commonality that they share.